Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Flow. Today we're discussing mythology, specifically Greek and Egyptian mythology. It's the most asked for, it's the most known about. And what we're going to do is not necessarily give you a historic timeline about what came first, what happened. More so, like, let's delve into it. What does this mean? How can we learn from Greek or Egyptian mythology? Which one do you think is most important, first and foremost? To modern day society, what do people know more, Egyptian or Greek?
Greek for sure.
Greek for sure.
Yeah, for sure. We have references to Greek mythology and hints of Roman mythology in like what you call throughout our films, our literature,
Okay.
our livelihood. Similar. We recognize their names. Like if I ask like someone what Zeus is, like
Everyone
people know.
knows who
Yeah.
Zeus is.
Whereas Egyptian, even though we do learn about it in primary school and stuff, I don't think it's you kind of forget it because it doesn't really it's not referred to all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a particular reason why people remember the Greek gods more than they do the Egyptian gods? Because both ridiculously amazing civilizations with great achievements.
I feel like firstly it's because it was closer to home, Roman Empire, all that kind of stuff, like the way it spread. Do you get me? Travel center helps as well. But like what do you call? I feel like with Egyptian gods, there's a kind of cultural thing with it. Like it's a more of an African, you know, like what do you call? It doesn't like if you could have a corner of like a theme park with it, but it wouldn't be like into your culture,
Oh,
like your everyday culture. Just because even some of these names when we were researching them they were so hard to pronounce and stuff because it's not our culture and we've not been but the
language.
but the Greek
Language.
ones, even the word, by the way, mythology comes from the Greek word mythos, which literally means story. So what do you call, even like all language, Latin and stuff, like it's all intertwined, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely that really helps. It also doesn't help that there's just more archaeological evidence
Oh yeah.
for some of the Greek mythologies. But also, we look at the historical thinkers or the writers. Homer's Iliad is ridiculous. Like, if I've read the Odyssey, if you guys have, you'll know the amazing stories that come from it. Like Troy, the movie, literally depicted
Yeah,
out of the poetry of
I
Homer.
love Troy.
Pluto told us about Atlantis.
Yeah.
Atlantis, amazing civilization. I could only aspire to imagine
Yeah.
what it would be like to live like that.
Percy Jackson, for example.
But yeah,
Yeah.
all sorts of things. I think though, let's look on to the Egyptian mythology first. So the
Who?
main god Ra, which
Ra.
I think Ra
The sun god.
translates to light. Yeah.
Yeah, which is interesting, because like at that time, right, in that civilization where there was no electricity or anything like that, like the sun was a huge power. The sun was very visible, and it was very it was the reliance of all their nutrition, their food, their livelihood. You know, the representation of day and night. Like you can't, like at that time, like today we can with street lights and stuff, but you can't even light things up with like lamps and stuff to that extent where what the sun can do. So just as like in most societies, the sun played a very important role in the Egyptian society. Which god was it? Was it Newt, the one that swallowed the sun every morning and
I swallowed the sun. I believe so. Yeah, but it was Ra who illuminated it on his sunboat.
yeah.
And I've got it written here. Ra rides the sunboat, lighting the whole world every day. At night, he would sail the underworld, go through the 12 gates where he would fight the snake Apophis, a female snake, by the way, in
Yeah.
case that's important to anyone. And the snake would try to swallow the boat.
Yeah.
And in the case in which the Apophis would ever swallow the boat, do you know what the
Yeah.
Egyptians referred that to? Eclipse. They said that if there was ever an eclipse, they believed that it was Apophis managed to swallow Ra.
Yeah.
And that happened once, apparently. But every other day since, Ra successfully goes and illuminates the world and comes back through the
Yeah.
underworld.
See, me and you know different stories because myths are like that.
No, of
Like,
course, yeah.
yeah. So there'll be like different versions of the same god, different stories, different myths in different areas, different regions. Specifically, because half of them weren't really, no one had seen these things, right? They're just
Things get lost
stories.
in translation,
Exactly.
don't
So I feel like even we were discussing even the faces, the anthropomorphic, statues and stuff, they're different as well, right? Like
Yeah.
some of them are like falcons, and some of them look like eagles, and like the different versions, and they get changed from place and time and stuff like that.
There's also there's a main point that I just came across,
Mm.
and I thought about it, and it makes the most sense. We are going into ancient Egypt,
Yeah.
finding these ruins of this lost civilization, and teaching ourselves to translate hieroglyphics. So, of course, there's going to be, it's going to be lost in translation because
Yeah.
not only is it not our language to begin with, this you said like just earlier, it was easier to interpret and understand the Greek mythology because our language comes from the Latin and the Greek literature to an
Yeah.
extent, right? But none of our words come from ancient Egypt.
And the further we go back in time, the more difficult it is to depict
Of course.
exactly what they were using this for and stuff.
Yeah.
But with all mythology, I feel like Egyptian mythology also had a huge religious leaning. Like, what do you call, these were gods and figures that they worshipped, and obviously they gave them stories and births, and the deaths even, or changing of their characteristics and their attributes and stuff like that.
Yeah, Osiris is a god that starts off as one of the main pharaohs, but then becomes the god of the underworld when killed by his brother Seth.
Yeah, so I feel like, what do you call, sometimes they were actually real kings, like real pharaohs or real kings of Egypt, where when they died, they became gods and they were worshipped. Like, for example, if you came down line of one of the kings, right, you would kind of like, just for your power and stuff, you were trying to make people worship them, because then you're like, you have some kind of blood of gods. Your forefathers were gods.
Do you think that,
like, for example, Osiris or someone, or Isis or whoever, right, was depicted as a god, right? And they were buried in a pyramid and everything.
They were gods.
Yeah. So basically, and imagine they used to be kings or something, or pharaohs, right? Then their descendants, right, would be seen highly because they were descendants of gods.
Oh no, for sure. Yeah. We've seen that in not to deviate from what we're talking about, but you see that everywhere. Even monarchs used to claim that they came from lineage of gods, or they were chosen. So that's a very common thing. I actually think partly this is not to discredit the mythology, because I can neither sit here, prove or disprove whether ancient Egypt or the Greeks got it right with their religion. That's not for me to say.
Of course.
I can only study and learn from it. What I was going to say was, I think the reason why people do this is because all humans, or most of us, would much rather believe and follow a god rather than a human. So if a pharaoh had a claim to the throne that was not religious, that didn't have the strength behind it of an Osiris or an Isis, then maybe you wouldn't fear that pharaoh. Maybe you wouldn't pray to the pharaoh. Maybe you wouldn't. Maybe that's what it is to an extent.
Yeah.
Like, there's a power dynamic that if the pharaoh says, "Please me," and you please Ra, instead of, "Hey, I'm just human and I'm kind of here now."
Yeah.
They overthrow him.
And their stories continue. It's like it's always evolving, and new aspects of the story is coming in. And, it's almost like it's because Egyptians believed in afterlife, innit?
Of course.
So that's a
really important,
very important part, because the thing is, they didn't just believe that you died, and that's why they buried all your treasure with you and stuff like that, because they're like, oh, this guy's gonna need it in his afterlife and stuff. So I feel like the afterlife factor and the underworld and stuff is a huge part of the Egyptian mythology, because the people there believe that these are not just our kings here; they're gonna be gods when we die as well.
Yeah. So in terms of that, do you want to, well, Anubis and Osiris are the main figures of that. Anubis being almost like the jackal-headed human.
Yeah.
And has a bit of a dark depiction, but actually isn't evil.
Wait, I don't understand this fact. Like, why do they have like Seth and stuff? Like, why do they have like evil gods?
Seth was evil.
Yeah.
Seth was evil because, well, let's see what happened. So Seth and Osiris are both the children of Ra.
Yeah, the brothers.
Okay. No, they're not. Geb and Net. Yeah. It's not Ra. Ra is the main god, so we're talking right at the top of the hierarchy. And then Ra has Shu and Tenant, I believe. Not Tenant, Tenut. And then there's Geb, and then there's Nut. Point being, Osiris and Seth are brothers.
Yeah.
What happens is Osiris gets to rule the people and is the main pharaoh, and Seth has to go out to the desert. and be the god there.
Yeah.
So what ends up happening is Seth becomes a usurper, because when Osiris wants to relinquish his power as pharaoh, he then wants his son Horus to take the throne, and Seth believes it was his right.
Yeah.
So what ends up happening is you have that, I would say, a very emotionally real event, things that would occur in real life as well, brothers fighting over hierarchy and things as such. So Seth kills Osiris, and then kind of exiles Horus, and then Horus has to come back almost after like 80 years to reclaim the throne that is rightfully his. But Seth doesn't believe it. Seth believes that I'm your brother, I'm older than and more wiser than Horus, therefore I should get the throne. And on one side would be your soul or your heart, depending on where you get the translation from. And Anubis would weigh your heart against this feather. If your heart overweighed the feather, it meant your sins were greater than your good deeds. If the feather was heavier, or if it was the same, it means that you could go to heaven. And just like modern day religion and modern day stories, there was a reward and a punishment for being good or bad in your life.
Yeah.
And also, there was a big, I forgot the name, there was a big creature in Egyptian mythology which then devours you and eats you alive. If I think it's Ahmet, that's how you pronounce it.
Maybe.
And it fully eats you alive if Anubis claims you unworthy of the righteous. So it's very similar to every religion, every source of mythology you go to. There's good and bad. There's life and death. There's punishment and reward for your actions.
Yeah, which is interesting because the thing is, like, what you call, there is a certain kind of veneer in every religion that is there and present. And you know, moving on to what you call Greek gods, did they believe in an afterlife?
Oh yeah, for sure. Not only that, you had to pay to get across. So with Greek mythology, when you died, they would put coins on your eyes. So this was so that you could pay your way into the afterlife. You didn't have to be ridiculously rich. They weren't completely unjust, but
So you could bribe
it was no, not so much. It's like, okay, so let me explain. By paying, you don't pay your way into heaven. You pay to make the journey across to the actual afterlife. So there's stages. The Greek mythology believes that.
Wait, why is there always a staircase?
Staircase. In this case, it wasn't a staircase, but which staircase?
In what you call movies and stuff, they always show. This is why you should.
I think maybe it's an artistic depiction.
Yeah, maybe.
Because depending on how you look at it, or which movie or which mythology you read, even hell itself, which is referred to as I forgot the name, is depicted differently. But like I said, with the coins, they pay for passage. That's the one.
Yeah.
They pay for passage.
So they can actually get to the afterlife.
To the judgment. Yeah. To their judgment, and then where they go depends on how they've.
So if you're like, what's the threshold like?
Most people.
Did it change depending on the time?
Most people will end up in Elysium, if I'm pronouncing that properly. Elysium was neither the place of the gods, nor was it the place of the evil people.
Yeah. So just to what do you call, give you a bit of background. So the Greeks had 3 categories. So they had gods, which were like sons of gods, and you know, like what you call, their mum and dad were both gods and stuff.
Yeah.
You had demigods, which were what you call half human, half god. And then you had heroes, which were just like what you call real life people who were depicted as like, you know, with characteristics and stuff, or you know, some kind of mythic tale attached to them.
For sure. So the god of all gods,
Zeus,
of the Olympians, Zeus, his brother Poseidon, and his other brother Hades. Would you want to hear something really? Because we just talked about, literally 2 minutes ago, we just talked about Seth and Osiris fighting for who was the rightful king, pharaoh. Do you know what Zeus did to manipulate the situation? So in a fair way, Zeus made him and his 3 brothers draw for the roles of either sky, ocean, and underworld. It was rigged. Zeus was never going to lose. It was
Yeah.
Zeus's idea, and Zeus knew all too well, according to the mythology, that he was ending up in Olympus as the highest of all highest gods. Because Mount Olympus, supposedly where the main Olympian gods ruled, is the height and the cradle of Greek mythology. It's where you go at your happiest or at the end of your life is if you should die as a god, which was very hard, you know. And then there was the ocean, and then below was Hades, and Hades actually felt really hard done on many occasions. And I'm just drawing that parallel between Seth and Osiris.
Yeah.
It's just very interesting how
I feel like these
thousands of years apart, very similar stories in a way.
No, definitely, and especially with like what do you call murder and like father and son and all that kind of stuff. You know, Greek mythology really goes there. Um, but did they believe gods died as well? The Greeks.
They did have a sort of immortality, but depending on the stories and where you get them from, there was an end per se to a
Because
god.
there's like wars happening between gods and like what do you call generations.
And Titans.
Yeah.
The Titans came before the gods. So to give it a bit of a background
The Titans weren't gods.
the Titans were greater than gods.
Uh-huh.
The gods come from the Titans. So Kronos is the father of Zeus, Poseidon, Hades, and many more. But I had a little. Kronos himself, though, was the son of Uranus. Yeah?
The planet.
No.
Alright.
When you start talking about planets, I think you start getting into Roman mythology.
Go on.
So let me explain this. There's a little backstory, and I'm just getting it right in my mind, and I'll tell you guys. Okay. So Uranus had a fear that his sons would kill him and take his power. And one of his sons was Kronos, right? And then when it came to Kronos and his offspring, he had the same thing. So he started eating and imprisoning his offspring.
Yeah, he started eating children.
Yeah?
Yeah.
And one of the ways in which he was deceived by his wife was that when Zeus was born, his wife gave him like 2 rocks, kind of like bonded like a child, and said to Kronos, "This is your child," and then put Zeus into hiding. And then Zeus eventually comes out and saves all the Olympians, so to speak, although they weren't referred to as Olympians at that time.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to draw that parallel as well. Like, Uranus tried to eat his children, Kronos tried to eat his children, but fortunately for us and the rest
So
of the
they were
story,
scared.
yeah, Zeus wasn't as bad. Zeus and Poseidon and Hades weren't. Although they had a lot of kids and a lot of offspring, they didn't try to eat their kids. But yeah, Kronos was scared that they would take his power. But naturally, you would be, if you, let's say, Josefa, right? Let's just deviate from actual mythology for a second. Let's say there is a person and they are a liar and a thief and they can't be trusted. Do you not think they would then treat everybody else the same? Bless you. Do you not think they would treat everyone else the same?
Yeah. I mean, like, especially because they're immortal, right? That is the scary part. Because, like, as human beings, though, you know that, all right, your time's going to pass and there's going to be children's time and stuff like that. But if you want to stay forever as well, and your children want to stay forever as well, and their children, then it gets a bit complicated because there's going to be constant power struggles and stuff like that.
It's just, I mean, I think, look, I don't know, it depends on your analogy. I wasn't around back then, but I feel like there was enough power to go around.
Yeah, fully.
But Kronos as a Titan, the king of gods, you know, Kronos married, the pronunciations are difficult, do excuse me, Rhea. And then Rhea gave birth to the goddess
So she
we
was
know
also
them today.
Titan.
Yeah, Rhea was also a Titan.
So wait, did they praise the Titans as well?
Oh yeah, by the way, Zeus was raised in Crete. Crete is a place in Greek mythology that's just very important. But sorry, go on, say that again.
So I was saying, so the Greeks, ancient Greeks, they prayed to the Titans as well.
I can't say.
I
can't say because I would imagine not. And the reason I would say that is because Zeus and his brothers banished the Titans. Apparently, there was a whole 10-year war in which the gods won. The gods defeated the Titans.
Makes sense. So they were like
Zeus
these beings
lightning ball
in their mythology before the gods, which gave birth to the gods, and then the gods basically defeated them and became gods. Right.
Yes, literally just kind of like the Egyptians that we talked into, and how naturally, like anything else, the hierarchy has to change at some point.
Yeah.
But what is really important about the Greek gods and Egyptian gods, as we know, is that they had so many gods for so many different things.
Yeah.
So before we just touched on Anubis and Osiris being a part of the underworld, and then Ra is light, and so on and so forth, right? With Egyptians, you had Zeus, the king of all kings, and the giver of the lightning, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Poseidon, the sea, and earthquakes, and horses.
Yeah.
Okay, literally
Horses.
because horses were so important in those
There was
days.
an olive god as well, wasn't there?
Was that Athena?
Athena, I think.
I think
Athena
it
was literally just famous for
Athena
war
was
and
like a tactician,
tactician,
wisdom.
in wars, and also the god of olives. Like
But
literally,
olives are big within that
it was huge.
culture
Yeah,
as well.
in all of the Mediterranean. But what do you call
Hades.
There's a lot of things that are like. There's a lot of things that are intrinsic within our culture. So, for example, what do you call Hermes, right?
Yeah.
Is the delivery service, but it's also the god of roads.
The messenger god.
Yeah, the messenger god. But also the road of like paths and stuff. And there's what you call the.
You're talking about like actual modern day examples.
What's it called? The god with the arrow.
Is it Ares?
I'm not sure.
I don't think it's Ares. Ares is the god of war.
No, it's not Ares.
Google it, bro.
Um,
Well, I'll give you some names. There's Apollo, there's Athena, Hephaestus, Hera,
yeah.
Hermes, Hades, Aphrodite, Hera. Hera's really important.
Eros, the god of love.
There you go.
Yeah, in Greek
Wait,
mythology.
like love as in the.
Yes.
You know what's amazing, guys? If you want to learn about mythology, the best place to go. Oh, this is almost like.
Yeah, do you get it? So it's like it's so deep in our. We just recognize it if we see it in the
we
flying
draw
kid
inspiration
with the,
from it.
Yeah, so
But
basically.
we call it something different.
So, what do you call? It's in our culture. It's in popular culture. It's in the things around us.
Pop
so
culture as well.
kind of it stays with us.
Yeah, it's very, very.
Even though no one
infused in-
worships these gods anymore. they
No,
still have-
not so much. There's like a very small group of people in Greece that still do, but not really. Not like before. It's very interesting though. You can draw so many amazing stories from them, and deception and jealousy were such a big thing. I was just gonna say though, before I get back onto that point, you want to learn about mythology, go to a museum. You see amazing things. Like honestly, in a crazy way, I suppose crazy for me because I have different religious opinions. You almost start to believe that all of these gods were real because when you go into these major museums and you see the artwork, the depictions of them, and you're like, what must have inspired somebody to draw something so beautiful? Was this actually real? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like honestly, when you see the craftsmanship, when you see the the masonry work, when you look at I really love architecture. When you look at the sizes, the temples, the depictions of them, and everything that was done for these so-called gods, it really makes you think they must have existed.
It's like
they really inspired man.
It would have been a part of their religion and culture because the thing is like at that time it wasn't like nowadays where information is like so easily available. So you would have the information of your area. So if you're like what you call your area is worshipping a certain type of god, right? You would know about that.
Like if you're on a coast, you worship Poseidon because you're by the sea.
But you'd still have an idea of other like what you call Greek gods. But I'm saying that you wouldn't be like, for example, a Buddhist randomly.
No,
like, do you get me? So
they
it would like be a part of the things you would see, the things you would hear, folk tales, things that you'd hear from your grandmother when you're growing up, stuff like that. And it's always like, and artists work with it, stonemasons, all those kind of things. Like, do you get me? Then you have a whole generation who is, keen to those things, and especially because at a time where things were so out of hand, and they had to go to like the seas and stuff like that, they needed all these things to hold on to.
But I believe that, but I could make the argument for modern day religion. Sometimes when we get desperate, even the most atheist people start to pray.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to say is how amazingly inspired they were to build these temples,
of course, yeah.
to build the pyramids of Giza. Like just go back onto Egyptian mythology to look at the temples. Atlantis, bro. Atlantis wasn't just made for the sake of living in this great city. There was worship, there was rule, there was sacrifice. Animals were worshipped to an extent. Certain animals were just as important as certain deities.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to say,
and the sacrificing thing is across the board.
Yes, big thing.
Egyptians did it, the Greeks did it, the Romans did it. They all did it.
Modern day religions do it.
Satanists do it.
See, but no, you don't have to go all out extreme.
Yeah.
Even as Muslims to an extent, right?
Yeah.
they kind of butcher an animal in the name of God and so on and so forth. So
Exactly. Yeah, and they make
Yeah.
sacrifice.
it's a very common thing.
Yeah.
Did you know what I want to talk about now? I mean, if you're ready to deviate.
Yeah, of course.
Well, I'm staying on Greek mythology, but I'm gonna point to a figure which is so famous that everyone's heard of. Hercules in the Roman translation, or Heracles.
Heracles.
I want to talk about Heracles because who doesn't know Heracles?
Yeah.
Tell me a little of like your first thought. Do you think it's a Disney movie?
Yeah, I just think of Disney movies when I think of Hercules, but it's such a
Powerful hero,
yeah. But the thing is, Hercules wasn't a god, was he?
demigod,
Demigod, right? Was his father Zeus?
Zeus.
Yes. So Zeus had relations with an
Zeus
ordinary.
had. Okay, so one thing we're going to do, by the way, I have it written down here. But one thing we're going to do, and if you guys remember, our first ever podcast was consciousness and determinism and fate and all that type of stuff. So we're going to touch on that because Greek mythology and Egyptian mythology leans heavily towards determinism. And to talk about Heracles a bit more, the word Hera is in Heracles because at one point he was named after Hera. So what they had to do with Heracles was, because it was obviously an illegitimate child of Zeus and Hera wasn't having it, and Hera was the queen of Olympus. So okay, she wasn't more powerful than Zeus, but she was still going to have her way, right? So she wanted to get rid of and banish Heracles, so they had to hide him. But unknowingly, Heracles was for a short time period actually under the guidance of Hera. And at this point, this is where he got the name Heracles, which means glory to Hera.
So she didn't know it was him that she was protecting.
For that short amount of time in which she actually then breastfed him.
Yeah.
And another miraculous story that comes about, for all those wondering, how many more are there? There's plenty. It is told, depending on where you read it, that Heracles as a child, when sucking on for the milk of Hera, bit too hard, Hera had to push him away, and the milk that then spilled everywhere created the Milky Way, the actual Milky Way. Yeah, I'm not saying it's not an exact science, Greek mythology. No, but that's one of the depictions.
That's mad. Yeah. No, there's loads of crazy
It's
stories
surreal,
like that. Yeah.
isn't it? It's surreal.
But what do you call Heracles? Like, he must have been a real person, right?
Well, I can't prove or disprove, but I do know that the literature speaks of Heracles at a very high level.
Yeah. I always thought he was like a demigod and like a hero, right?
He was a hero. He was a hero. He did many acts in his 12 labors. So here's what you got to realize about Hera. Unfortunately, because she was cheated on so much by Zeus, she grew very resentful. She grew very resentful. So when we talk about her hate for Heracles and other demigods, it didn't just start at the beginning of their life and they were left alone. At one point in his adult life, when Hercules is married and has a family, Hera gets into his head and gives him a psychotic state in which he murders his whole family. And then Heracles, I keep saying Hercules because of the Roman and the English translation. Heracles doesn't know that he's being manipulated. So he goes to an oracle and says, what can I do to be absolved of my sins? And the oracle says, go and do 10 labors for the king. The name of the king. Eurystheus, yeah. So the oracle says, and again, this oracles are determinism again. The oracle says to Heracles, go do 10 labors for the king Eurystheus. But guess who was controlling the oracle?
Yeah.
Guess?
Hera.
Yeah, so Hera was really messing with Heracles all of his life because of the jealousy she had that Zeus had gone and had another child with somebody else. But just to lean toward modern day life again, wouldn't anyone be like that? If a woman was cheated on, would she not resent?
That's the thing, like, you don't, like, the Greeks gave their gods human characteristics.
Fully.
Because, like, in the three main religions, like Abrahamic faith and stuff, we don't have that. Right, God is perfect and stuff. Like, do you get me?
Yes.
But they didn't have that.
Prophets are perfect.
They had imperfections. Like, gods were jealous, or they used to cry, and they used to, like, be sad or remorseful for each other, and they used to betray each other and fight each other. So it's really weird. It's like it's like they really fantasize about these things, and about things that humans did. Sometimes even humans couldn't do. Do you get me? They went to that extent.
But also, a human could say, you know, just speaking out of tongue here, but let's say like you're a random person in Greek mythology and you had a kid with another woman and your wife was angry. Yo, Zeus did it. Poseidon did it.
Imagine
No,
that wouldn't
seriously.
go down well.
It wouldn't go down well. It didn't go down well with the queen. Why would it go down well with a regular woman? But Hera was worshipped and idolized by many, but with her husband, she was having a very difficult time.
Yeah.
Because Zeus had, make no mistake, we'll touch on more demigods. Zeus had many kids, including the likes of Perseus, who's also very popular. But I want to talk about the 12 labors of Heracles.
So tell us about that.
There was actually 10, two of which were not counted by the king, so they had to become 12. But I'll give you a few of them. There was the Nemean lion, supposedly had such tough skin that not even any sword could pierce it, and Hercules had to go and kill this lion. There was the Hydra, the three-headed Hydra. That was one of the labors that was not counted because Hercules needed the help of his cousin Lolus, his nephew, sorry, in order to kill the Hydra. Because the problem with the Hydra was when you cut off one head, two grew in its place.
Yeah.
So he needed help. And but like I said, this was one of the 10 original labors that wasn't counted by the king, so he had to make up for them by therefore making 12. You have the Cerenian hide, something that was very hard to track down. So Heracles was not just asked to physically go and use his strength to murder a monster, but to use other sources of knowledge to track down an animal or something that the god worshipped, that the king wanted. You have the birds, the man-eating birds of Hades, which he had to kill. You have the horses of Diomedes, the man-eating horses. The belt of Hippolyta, the Cerberus, the dog of the underworld. King Eurystheus said, "Bring me the god."
So what ended up happening with Hercules after he did all this?
So without going into all the 12 labors, he completed all of them. He completed all of them, and then he felt that he was done, and that he was now a free man, and that he could, let's say, forgive himself for killing his family. Which, like we said, by the way, he had no idea that Hera had manipulated this. But at the end, to make it ridiculously ironic, the end of Hercules came when his wife, his second wife, killed him out of jealousy. I want to get your reaction to that. Imagine, like, you've just done all these labors, you've had such a tough life.
Wait, was Hera behind that as well?
No, Hera wasn't behind this one. This was just pure jealousy. I couldn't tell you exactly why the jealousy.
Wait, so the children of demigods aren't like...
They can die much more. But, supposedly, depending on where you read get your information from, at the end of his life, Zeus gave him a seat at Mount Olympus because of his heroics. Now, 12 labors.
Yeah.
12.
And the Olympics itself is a reference to Olympia, right?
Yeah, because the Olympics or the sports of it or whatever actually comes from ancient Greece anyway.
Yeah.
So maybe, that's, like you were saying.
All these stories of Hercules, like trials and stuff, all of this is like kind of embedded in that theme, isn't it?
Yeah. His trials were amazing. I'm surprised no one's actually made a complete movie. I think they have been actually, to kind of like depict the animals. It would be so amazing if, with today's modern days CGI, if you could have like a Heracles killing the Hydra or the Erymanthian boar.
Do you know maybe you could make.
I'm not that skilled, bro. But what do you think? What do you think about what I just mentioned before going into the story about determinism?
Yeah, no, I feel like it's amazing because even the like you might be pissed off at Hera for doing this, but like the thing that came out of it is huge, like the 12 labors and the trials and stuff that went into it. So even though like the initial like thing is very sad, I feel like people would have been able to relate to this, right? People would have been able to like say, oh, if he did all this, like there must be some kind of purpose for me to do, like go past these hurdles and stuff like that. Or if you're in a really particularly bad state, like this guy killed his whole family, right?
Do you think it was inspiring?
I feel like all these stories were inspiring for someone or not. Like, I feel like you could get to the wrong end of this as well and be inspired by the evil stuff that happened as well, because
Okay.
you could be like, I did this evil thing, but then okay, like Hera did this as well. Do you get me? So you kind of get
So
away
you're
with it.
using the gods as an excuse, like I said earlier. If you had a child with a woman, would you say, well, Zeus did it?
Yeah.
No, I do think it's still a bad example. I think
Mm.
here's the thing, right? I think ironically, even though the humans knew that these gods had flaws, at the same time, though, the gods were only allowed to be worshipped in their good lights.
Yeah.
When they were making temples for Zeus or when they were making temples for Poseidon, they weren't talking about all their offspring.
But the whole it's in the backdrop though to all of this.
Jealousy, though, jealousy is a really important thing because we all know about Medusa, right? You know, the look that turns man into stone. Medusa was actually very beautiful, and then out of jealousy turned into what she became. And then she had to go into kind of like hiding and into the specific place where many men fell when they tried to go murder her or when they tried to go get her head. Do you know who it was who eventually chopped the head off Medusa?
No.
You do know this because this is like really intertwined in modern day pop culture. It's a really top movie as well.
Spartacus.
No, it wasn't Spartacus, it was Perseus.
Perseus.
Another demigod, another son of Zeus. And he eventually goes to cut off the head of Medusa. And depending on the movie and the story again that you get it from, he kills the Kraken and so on and so forth. But yeah, it's amazing. There's so many demigods. Achilles was a demigod. Achilles is famous for being a warrior during the Trojan War and things as such. Perseus, by the way, was very resentful of his father because due to the actions of his father Zeus, him and his mother were left for dead. So they were thrown in. They were put into like this wooden, almost like casket, and just thrown into the ocean.
Mm. And you know, what you call when wars were happening, like between Sparta and Athens and stuff, they were using different gods for support and stuff. Like Athens was using Athena and stuff, and the goddess strategy stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it was crazy how like these stories and stuff were evolving with the events and wars and stuff that were happening in the era.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. And there were times in which the kings would rebel against the gods. And this was because how do I put this? Perseus, his banishment was a direct like insult to Zeus. Because here you are as a king knowing that that child is a demigod and is fathered by Zeus, and you throw it into the ocean as an act of rebellion. You know? And then apparently, according to the story, it is Zeus who asks Poseidon to make sure that Perseus doesn't die. And then when Perseus doesn't die, he goes on to kill the king and so on and so forth, and kill Medusa and all these amazing things. But again, going back to the human characteristics, not only did gods have human characteristics, but kings did not always fear gods.
Yeah.
And that's not something you hear
That's
about
really mad, you know,
in modern religions.
It's like they didn't like have complete control of everything at all times.
The kings got very egotistic.
Yeah.
And they believed that they could outdo the gods, and they believed that because of their riches and their palaces that they were greater than the gods, and the gods could do nothing. And if the gods didn't get the praise of the humans, then they were weak. You know, depending on what you read, they would say that the gods were only as strong as the faith that people had in them. You know?
Yeah. And what do you call Greek mythology does show that, you know, gods weren't all powerful at all times for them, right? Because like they couldn't, like for example, Zeus had to send someone else and do something. Do you get me?
Yeah.
So it wasn't like, but you know, what I'm interested in is for both, you know, Egyptian and Greek gods, they were like more powerful gods and less powerful gods, right? Like they were like gods which had very limited, you know, power, you know, very niche kind of spectrum of, you know, what they can do, and some, you know, who are very much more powerful, and they were having like smaller fights and bigger fights and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So what's that all about? Especially with the Titans and stuff like that.
Hades did that. Hades was kind of resentful that Zeus had turned him into the underworld. That's one thing that Hades was kind of resentful of, because while Zeus was there lavishing over in Mount Olympus and having flipping grapes fed to him and giving him wine and so on and so forth, Hades was guarding the underworld. Hades was guarding Titans that were there. Hades was literally in a dark place. You know, didn't get to have much fun. Didn't get to go and have kids with everyone like all these other
So
guys
what did
did.
he end up doing?
Well, there's all sorts of stories. They were brothers at the end of the day, and there was love and resentment for each other. But for the most part, Hades just ruled in a just manner. See, Hades is directly related to the underworld, but not like how other religions do it. That so do you know how we talked about Anubis wasn't directly evil?
Yeah.
Same thing with Hades. Just because he drew the short straw and he got the underworld to look after, he wasn't necessarily an evil god, so to speak. They did. Seth was evil. Many other characters in mythology are evil, but not so much Hades. You know, it's just that you put him in the underworld, and it's almost like for like. Oh well, you're in the underworld, you must be evil. You know, so on and so forth.
Yeah, but he was just like taking care of this stuff there, basically.
He had to. He drew the short straw.
But there was this middle world as well, right?
The middle world, you could say, was the ocean led by Poseidon.
Mm.
Poseidon, who I
That
suppose
was very important for the Greeks, though.
Well, he was
The
the
ocean.
king of earthquakes as well,
Yeah.
and you know, supposedly earthquakes. Earthquakes are very common in that region anyway, even in this day, let alone back then. So you can imagine that there was, you know, one of his sons was a Pegasus. You know, the mythical creature Pegasus was directly the son of Poseidon,
Really?
which is very weird because he basically fathered a horse, a flying horse, so to speak.
Who was the mother?
I don't know. It is, but it's actually like brilliantly artistic, let me just say. And I do love the stories that you hear in whether it's Homer's Iliad or Pluto or other amazing writings of Greek mythology, because they really do amaze the imagination. You start to think like Atlantis, for example, people are still looking for it, bro. People go all over the world and think they can't directly find Atlantis, but they look for ruins, they look for mythology, they look for the ruins of one particular temple. They want some form of archaeological evidence, because with all of these myths, whether it's the Romans, Greek, Persians, Egyptians, you can't always find their direct civilization.
Yes. And this is why I think, like, in modern day, there isn't that much mythology, because science has replaced mythology now, hasn't it? Like, back in the day, like, if you had an earthquake, you know that Pegasus is, pissed off or something, or, something like that. But now we know exactly, like, tectonic plates are doing this. And so I feel like science has kind of replaced mythology. What do you think?
This is an important question, and it's easy to say that though. I'm not saying you're wrong. You're not wrong. I believe in the science myself, but let me give you an example. During the time of the Greek gods, if someone said this god is right and this god is wrong, it would be hard to prove or disprove. But maybe in ignorance, a lot of people would say the only gods are Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, and nobody else exists, right? These days now, because the Greek mythology is gone and Egyptian mythology is gone, it is easy for us to also say, well, it's science. It's just science. So, what you're saying isn't wrong. But
no, I'm saying just that normal people, right? So, at that time, just the average bloke, right, would have believed in these things because they actually genuinely believed in these things. But I feel like now it's like these things are good for our literature and stories and films, and it really helps the fans.
So you don't think they could possibly be right in any way? That these gods could have existed?
I personally don't believe it, but I
no,
believe
neither
that.
do I. I'm just curious.
But I believe that there might be real deities, like real people that like Hercules may have been a real man, but like he was god demigogified.
Do you think that, in a way, I definitely believe someone like Heracles could have been a real man, because when you look at his labors, firstly, you can't take them all at face value. The lion, for example, could have been a very regular lion in which no one else was able to kill. But let's say a warrior went to kill this lion and he came back and he wasn't able to kill it. In shame, he would say, my sword couldn't even penetrate the hide of the lion.
Yeah.
And then that would be the story. And then Heracles, let's say, and again we're just discussing this here, would go and then kill the lion, and they would believe all the hype.
Yeah.
My point being,
if you had to like go to to kill a lion, for example, you would pray to Hercules, or say that Hercules borrowed that story or that mythology, and it would really help you boost your morals and stuff. Yeah,
inspire you.
for sure.
People do. The thing is, whenever we talk about gods, whether we're talking about Greek mythology or we're talking about the main religions, we're always talking about belief. As much as there is evidence, to an extent, religion always comes down to belief.
It is.
That's why I was saying just now, not because I directly believe in Greek mythology, but it's very easy sometimes to dismiss other religious practices. Like Hinduism, for example, not very big here in the UK, not big amongst us as Muslims. But you go to India, and you look weird if you don't believe in Ganesh and the names of which I've forgotten. So it really does depend where you are sometimes, and that's something that you pointed to earlier, because these civilizations did kind of coincide.
That's what I mean. Like, you know, with Athena being so wise and a tactician and stuff like that, Athens kind of embodied that. Like, the way that Athens ruled was very,
Inspired
smart
by the goddess.
Yeah, they didn't. So it was like kind of where you came from became that kind of depiction of the things you worshipped as well.
No,
it's really weird how it works, but it's fascinating, man.
I agree, and I think it's brilliant. I think at the very least it makes for great stories, it makes for great literature, and it's amazing that these stories can be passed down for so long. That is sometimes why they are lost in translation and why we find it so hard to get our facts right, is because, look, depending on your source, it will be different. But what do you expect for something that happened thousands of years ago? There will always be disputes. There are many versions of Christianity. There are different sects of Islam. People can't always agree, but the belief remains strong. And gods really do, whether it's Greek gods or Egyptian gods or the god of the three books, gods really inspire man to do amazing things.
Yeah,
they really do. And that could be hateful things, that could be religious acts, that could be the building of mosques, of temples, of churches. These cathedrals that we go to, for example, you go to Paris and you go to a very famous cathedral, right, of Notre Dame. We go there now to take pictures and look at the stained glass and look at the architecture. People go there to pray, or people used to predominantly go there to pray. So before it became somewhere to go to have a look at, it was where people went out of desperation.
Yeah, people probably made it out of devotion and stuff.
Yeah,
very high devotion actually, especially with some of these, like for example the pyramids of Giza we talked about last time, right? Like, you had to be devoted to that cause, to the making, because generations were making these pyramids. Like, do you get me? Like, if it started on your granddad's time, it's still being made now. Like, do you get me? This is the level of faith they had in these things.
For sure. Great stories as well, like Troy, the Trojan horse, the deception, the killing, Helen of Troy, getting that.
It was all being.
It was done for love.
Yeah.
It's amazing how throughout history, not even in Greek mythology, but throughout history, it's amazing how many wars have been started over one woman. It's curiosity.
It is.
The thing is, sometimes the truth is never as interesting as the lie.
Of course. We love we love stories and
tragedy,
myths.
Tragedy. Everyone loves tragedy until it happens to themselves. There's a lot of redemption stories.
Yeah.
So, Heracles is a huge redemption story. All them years struggling and fighting off the jealousy of Hera. Perseus, in a way, is a redemption story.
Yes.
All of these great leaders, kings, they fall to Medusa, and Perseus just chops the head of Medusa. But guys, I enjoyed this. Thank you very much for watching, and take care.